So now that we have 4 primary phases built out, we'll create a special phase for the CI phase called an on-failure phase. This on-failure phase will execute automatically if a task fails that's configured to execute the on-failure phase in the event of a failure. For example, if we hover over the Run Test Web Backend task, we can see under the on-task failure setting that the task will wait for user action, or it will run the on-failure phase if one is found if the task fails. So once we have the on-failure phase created, if this task fails, the on-failure phase will automatically run. To create an on-failure phase for the CI phase, we'll click the flyout menu and then select Create On-Failure Phase. The purpose of this phase in our demonstration release is to roll back to a build of an application that did not fail. So we'll name this on-failure phase CI Rollback. And notice there are no options for running this phase. With other phases, you can choose whether the phase runs automatically, manually, or at a scheduled date and time. With on-failure phases, the run options are set in the on-task failure section of each task in the phase. And there you can choose to skip the task in the event of a failure, wait for manual intervention, or automatically run the on-failure phase if one is found. And we set up our task to run the on-failure phase automatically if there is a failure. We'll also select the Run Task with Updated Applications Only checkbox. And under Environments, we'll add the CI environment. And we can see that for the Select Trigger phase, the CI phase is already selected, so we'll leave the default setting as it is. So we're ready to click Create. And now we see the Show On Failure tab is part of the CI phase. And if we click this tab, we can see the on failure phase has been created, but there are no tasks yet. So in our example demonstration, the goal of the on failure phase is to communicate out to the teams that there was a failure, then redeploy the most recent successful build of the application before it failed, then communicate out to the team the build number that was redeployed, and require a user to manually come in and verify the redeployment. And the simplest way to do this is to duplicate the tasks in the CI phase, and then drag and drop them into the on failure phase where they can be updated as needed. And because we've already learned how to create and duplicate tasks, we'll go ahead and do this without actually walking through all of the steps. So now we can see that we have all of the tasks for the CI rollback on failure phase in place. And looking through these tasks, if the web backend fails, a message is sent out about the failure, the application is redeployed, a message is sent that the application was redeployed, and then there's a manual verification task that requires user input to complete this task. And then we can see the same task repeat for the web front-end application. And remember, we configured this phase to only run the tasks for updated applications. So for example, in the event only the web front-end fails, the web backend will not be redeployed. So now let's take a look at how CDD knows which build of the failed application to redeploy. If we open up the task that redeploys the web backend application, and we look at the Builds for Applications field, we can see there's a token in place called Web Backend Previous Successful Change. Typically, this field is populated with the Web Backend Last Successful Change token, which is also the default value for this field. But what we want to do in an on-failure phase is to deploy a rollback build, and to do this, CDD uses the built-in Web Backend Previous Successful Change token. So the way this works is if a task ends in a failed state, the application and build number associated with that task is flagged as failed. And CDD goes back and looks for the previous build that passed through the phase successfully. And the previous successful change token is updated with that build number. So for example, if build 3 of web backend application passes through the phase successfully, but builds 4 and 5 do not, build 3 will be the value of the previous successful change token. And when the on-failure phase runs, because the deployment task will pull the build number from the previous successful change token, the deployment task will then deploy build 3 so that the CI phase continues to have a successful build deployed. It's also good to note here that when this task was duplicated from the CI phase, the last successful change token was removed manually, and we replaced it with the previous successful change token. So what's important to remember here is that when you're creating an on-failure phase, the previous successful change token can be used to redeploy a successful build in the event of a failure.